Hello, my name is Jeff Hajic, and I am the founder of Valaction Continuous Improvement. The video you are about to watch comes from Valaction's Lean Office Overview DVD and is available for purchase at www.valaction.com. This DVD is part of the Lean Office Overview module of our Lean training system. This collection of materials takes an a la carte approach to continuous improvement education. Whether you are trying to learn more yourself or teach a team, you'll find just the components you need. Now enjoy the video, and thanks for watching. So, with that in mind, let's start talking about how the traditional office is organized and how it can start seeing some of the drawbacks on providing that value when you think about when you break down the practices that people use. So the first one is that idea of the account rep or the personal ownership, my account, my process. And why do people do it? Well, it's how it's always been done. There's a sense of continuity and tradition, but it also gives people that sense of responsibility, I own it, and then there's this perception, like I said, of customer value. But a drawback is it's hard to get coverage for it, and the employee really has to deal with a highly fluctuating demand. So if you have a stack of accounts and several of those accounts come in with orders or things on the same day, you get piles and piles of work forming up. There's also this traditional office, because you have a single person doing a single function, in a lot of cases, you lack this documentation, this continuity that can take you over a long period of time, because most of the information is kept as tribal knowledge. People just know it and they pass it down to their replacements, and there's not any really good reference material that you can look at. And the problem with this is that there's no time often in a small company that's not lean. You may not have the opportunity to devote resources to documenting, but there's also an emotional piece to it. And people like to feel secure in their jobs, and one way they feel secure is being the only one with a particular piece of knowledge. So it's not an overt way of doing it, but people do want to feel protected in their work. And they're not going to go out and resist giving information out, but they're probably not going to be super open with it, and they're not going to be promoting the fact that they know secrets and tricks and quick ways of doing things, unless it's really a culture that draws that out of people. And obviously the problem with that is it's not repeatable if you have different people doing things differently and you don't have it documented and you don't have anything to build on, and it's very hard to get backup. So if you're out of the office for the day and you're the only one who knows how to do things, you can see how the process will be waiting for you when you come back. Another issue that you have in the traditional offices is no specific linking. So you do what's called over-the-wall processing. I do my job and I fling whatever I've done over the wall to the next process step, and there's no sense of whether or not they're ready for it or if they've actually asked for more work. So it's a very disconnected series of processes. And of course, that when you're disconnected like that, you have much more limited cooperation. And the reason for this is that you tend to work in piles and you have a lot of long lead times. So there's not a big the flow is very lengthy in many cases, where you have much of the time that the work, a piece of work is flowing through the system. It's sitting in a pile for very, very long periods of time, and that disconnect contributes to this lack of linking. Now, a couple more. One is that staffing is independent of demand in a traditional office, and this is kind of the old concept of a clock is right twice a day, even if it's broken. If you have a very, very constant staffing, so if you have 6 people doing a job or 4 people doing a job, and that never fluctuates, but your demand does, you're never properly staffed. You're either overstaffed when demand is low or understaffed when it's high, even if over a long period of time you're meeting your average demand. And what happens is people work faster and slower, it causes problems, and it's very independent of it. Now, the reason for this is it's really hard to get help in a process. So if you have a 4-person team, it's very difficult to bring a 5th person in and assist with that process. And what you get out of that is you get, like I talked about, that accordion effect. When the pile starts to get bigger, people start to work faster. When it gets slower, people work slower, and people aren't working at a steady pace. The other problem is when you work at different paces and do different processes, you make more mistakes. And those mistakes contribute to additional problems over an additional workload. And finally, there's often a single person doing a single process. So you have one person very specifically dedicated to a specific action to do. One person places materials orders. One person seeks out new vendors. One person does engineering drawings. You have a single person assigned to a single process. And this happens often in functional organizations. And the downside is you really restrict the way work can flow through the organization, and you have multiple contacts with a particular customer. So if you think about something like an order entry process, the order fulfillment, the order comes in, a person may deal with a general rep, and then you get a specific rep assigned, and then you get an invoice and some follow-up calls from a certain accounting person on the normal things, and then maybe a collections person calling if you fall behind on payments. So you may be touching multiple people. A single customer may have contact with many, many different people, and each time it causes a little bit of a ramp-up period for the customer and for your own organization. So all these things, as you look at all the drawbacks have one thing in common, and they all have waste that they add to your process, to your system. And waste is basically anything that consumes resources without adding value. And there's a traditional look at waste, and this comes from the early days of the Toyota production system, and this was put together by Taiichi Ohno. And since then, since his original list, unused creativity is commonly added, and that's that +1 that I mentioned there. Now on this list, the biggest problem is overproduction. And that's because it creates and hides all the other forms of the waste. So if you're working ahead and you're making mistakes on something, you might make a mistake on a whole long series of processes. If you think about this in terms of a file, and you have an error on, say, the state tax rate, the tax rate changes, and you start invoicing a long series of things with, in a batch process, and you send out a whole bunch of invoices all at once, and they all have the incorrect numbers on it. You may have been able to find it earlier if you're sending them out in much more of a flow process. You might have gotten a call back from a customer sooner, or recognized it before you had a lot of work done that you have to go back and correct. So overproduction, when you work without having a very specific piece of demand and without the flow, you can create all these other problems. And the real issue with waste is that it often disguises itself as value-added work. And I'm going to go back to the actual example on a Kaizen event that I was working on years and years ago. And this was an organization that did processing of equipment. So they would track equipment that would have to go to an upper level maintenance facility. So it was a low level maintenance facility and then a higher level maintenance facility for the problems that they couldn't handle on their own. So the work would come in, they would work on it. If they couldn't handle it, they would fill out this form, and it was a triplicate form, fill it all out, take one form out, file it away, send a unit over to the second location. They would fill out the form. When they were finished, file one away, send it back to the first location, who would take that form, match it up with the original, and file that away. And when I went through and watched this process and was looking at improving it, I realized nobody ever touched those forms. I asked what they were used for. Both organizations said it was for the other team. And they both thought they were doing it for the other group, which really is, obviously one of those things you should just get rid of right away if nobody needs it. And what had happened was, over the course of time, they had drifted to a computerized system, and all the information on this form and triplicate went online and went into the database. So they didn't need the forms anymore, but nobody ever talked about it. And what happened, though, they thought they were filling out this form, they thought they were adding value to the process by doing this step. And it looked like it was real work, but it was completely useless. So you can find a lot of that when you start really scrutinizing your process. Stuff will start jumping out at you. So what is a lean office? Basically, it's an office that applies lean principles to the administrative setting. And again, there's a lot of work in your organization that's all away from the shop floor, all the enabling processes, and then any customer contacts and things like that. And you still want to have a lot of the basic tools in place. So you start thinking about these tools, Flow and 5S and demand management. These are all things you would do on the shop floor, but you also have to do them into the office. And there's a little bit different application of these tools, but you still want to use the same basic principles. And these are all ways to reduce the waste in your organization. So when I talk about lean, what I'm talking about is reducing waste to provide you the opportunity to serve your customers better.
The video you just watched came from the Lean Office Overview DVD from our Lean training system. You can purchase it at the link on the screen. You can also register for free at www.valaction.com to download several forms you can use to improve your Lean Office. These include the Office Process Summary Sheet, the Office Process Recording Sheet, and the Office Process Questionnaire. Plus, you can get a load of other great user-only content. Again, thanks for watching, and best wishes on your Lean journey.